is it fair that ZTE has been, quote unquote, punished by the Department of Commerce in the US? Professor Liu.
Well,
not give me a 30 minutes answer, but rather maybe 30 seconds. Let's just begin with that.
Actually, if you are, because I'm in the law circle, and legally speaking, they have all the logic link, and they have all the facts and the causal relationship. So I think there is no denial about the real case. So technically, they are doing in a right procedure. But of course, fairness is really depends on from which perspective. Number one.
What about your perspective?
Yeah, I think now, ZTE is providing more of the telecom equipments and mobile devices to Iran. So ethically, I think Iran people need more access to this type of equipment to have better access to information so that they can be more informed. And this is actually the intention of the US sanction over Iran, that, they need to protect the interests of the people, either for the nuclear issue or for ballistic missile issue. So they are there to protect the interest of the issue. So now it seems that the actual fact is that they are working against the US intention of imposing such a sanction.
Right. That is interesting, isn't it? Because it's a US imposed sanction. It's not a UN Security Council imposed sanction. And therefore, companies from all over the world have to obey the sanctions of one country. That is an interesting question. Maybe we could talk a little bit more in that direction. It could be any country. If one country in the Middle East have sanctions toward another country in the Middle East, therefore all the other countries from around the world, we know in the Middle East that there's a lot of conflicts, cannot do business with one or the other of the countries that we have just mentioned. That is going to be interesting. Mr. Koepp.
Well, indeed, and I think the latter scenario you described really applies to Israel and some of its neighbors. They have these unilateral, or say Arab world against Israel type of sanctions going on, which are hard for the rest of the world to follow. And those tend to be left to local issues and allow those belligerents or those people disagree to settle that. However, what you're mentioning here regarding UN, well, actually the Iran sanctions, those weren't just from the US, they were in fact also from the UN. As Baocheng just mentioned, there was a lifting of some of these sanctions, which also the US supported, regarding communications equipment for people. The key issue here was government applications.
How would you define people?
Right, well, yes, you could say that too, but in the US definition, it was, are you selling, and this is the other component that's important to bear in mind, you cannot take US made equipment and be providing it not just to Iran, by the way, also Sudan, North Korea, other countries on this blacklist. And the idea was, look, if you're going to buy our US made equipment, you cannot sell to these countries. So it wasn't so much a unilateral, you can't do business with them at all, but you can't use our products to do business with these countries.
That's interesting because we are in a globalized world.
Indeed.
One specific product is made of hundreds, if not thousands of components. If we have countries, as you just mentioned, specifically demanding that, every product could become controversial when it comes to international trade if there's any conflict between two countries. So once again, I want to throw back to you. First of all, you talk about what is definition of the interest of the people in Iran. And secondly, what about the point Robert mentioned, and I just reacted also, from Professor, your perspective, how does that work? And will this be used, this occasion, used as a trade barrier against certain companies who are on the rise, let's just say, in the US market?
Well, it is already a technical barrier because the supply has been blocked, and it seems that the permission to export is really having a very limited chance. So therefore, taking ZTE for example, ZTE actually on quarterly basis, they pay nearly 500 million to those major identified 7 major suppliers, from chips to service to
In the US.
Yeah, in the
US
US
suppliers, yeah.
So
Yes.
the US suppliers. So the US suppliers, I think they are not very happy with this issue because they are deprived of the revenue, and plus that US is having a very saturated market. They see that China is a rising market, and also they see that Chinese companies working as a partner, they can spread to the world, including Iran. One day when the ban is lifted, so that's a nascent market. So I think China is really a carrier of the U.S. technology and help the U.S. to earn more money at home, which is badly needed for its competitive industry like semiconductor.
But the question is, the Department of Commerce still did what it did,
Right.
despite of all of these reasoning you seem to provide. So what's going to be next? Because we've seen the fate of Huawei in the United States. One of the most well-respected Chinese telecom manufacturer and also network producer in the rest of the world, only not in the United States. It's
Right.
banned totally. Are other Chinese companies, particularly high-tech related, also going to eventually, quote unquote, endure that kinds of experience and fate?
Well, if I could also preface some of your remarks before making mine, I mean, in reference to your remarks,
Yeah.
by saying, just as Huawei hasn't really been given access to the US, so has Google and Facebook and a lot of American tech leaders not being given real access to China, while they're everywhere else in the world. So that we have this situation that applies to both countries' leading tech firms, and it's very unfortunate, to be honest, because I think all these companies provide really good products and services, and the people of China as well as the people of the United States aren't able to benefit from that. Now, whether or not these bans are justified or not, that's another question, but it's getting difficult as we do this
You
increasingly.
could argue from both sides that if you do this and now do that, but nobody is looking at it as a direct reaction of any Chinese action or American action. The question is, what about this case? We could bring all the cases together and say, well, you guys also do this, but what about this specific case? Let's just talk about that,
Right.
make that clear. So what about this specific case? What
Well,
would that mean for all the tech giants coming from China?
But this is where I think
Not counter-related, by the way.
Right.
They are more equipment builders and telecom
Okay.
equipment builders.
But I think it fits into this bigger pattern. And to answer your point specifically, the danger here is that the Chinese side views this as a kind of attack against Chinese
And it's not?
interests. Well, according to the U.S. law and according to the application of the law, and indeed, as Baocheng just mentioned, it's also American suppliers who suffer. So you can't really say this is all anti-Chinese in some way. It's also hurting the American interest. It's that this law was violated, and now there are going to be consequences. It then becomes a matter of how will China interpret that? Will China say, okay, you do that, I'll do something else, and then we got an escalating trade war going on? That's the real danger here.
The thing is also, when one takes action toward, let's just say, an influential giant company toward the others, one probably needs to have in mind what might be interpretation coming from the other side.
Right.
It works both ways. Professor Liu, help us to understand about that part. What would that mean for Chinese tech companies? Would that mean, one after another, they would leave the U.S.? And what would that mean for technological cooperation and national security cooperation, which has been
Good point.
one of the shining points that the two countries seem to cooperate on since the two presidents were meeting with one another. So what would all of this mean?
Well, apparently, for this case, both sides get hurt, from the U.S. suppliers and to the Chinese buyer like ZTE. But the fact that the U.S. still in the upper hand because they are the sole supplier. So China does not, so far at least, does not have much alternative. And I think that's also may send a positive signal to China to strengthen a national consensus.
Here's a silver lining, reader.
A consensus to strengthen China's technological independence, which is really very well needed.
But Professor, it's well said what you said. But the thing is, we are in a globalized world.
Right,
Exactly.
that's true.
We can't deny that. We can't say, my country made this, and you guys can't use that.
Right.
And it's my say as to who's going to use that. Because the other party also use products from all over the world. Even though some could be high-tech, some could be lower-end product, but it's also important for people in that country as well.
I think
Whether
it
it's toilet
boils down-
papers or computer chips.
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, I think it's boils very simply boils down to a letter, a sort of inadequate the confidence that there is high level of suspension, and also there is AO transparency in this issue. I think from the Chinese side, both at the corporate level and also at the development level, there is also room to improve in terms of communication and the negotiation.
This is nothing new, by the way, Mr. Koepp.
Right.
Trade wars and using trade as a political tool against one another in certain circumstances, despite the fact that Iran-US relations has been changing very dramatically. And Iran itself has been changing very dramatically over the past few years. But what would this really mean? Where would this lead us to? Is this going to be the beginning of another round of harsh words, actions, reaction toward one another? Trade is considered to be the foundation for the US-China relations, the most crucial bilateral relations. I throw in a lot of preconditions to you, but these are very important points to make before we reach any conclusion, Mr. Koepp.
Well, I think you articulated that well, and indeed, this is what I'm fearful of, that this could lead to worse consequences beyond this one instance of the repercussions towards ZTE. I like to think the silver lining here could be, though, that it will encourage more opening up and more collaboration, but that's going to take some proactive efforts from both sides.
Well, that's pretty strong silver lining.
Well, let's hope that's what happens, because the downside is really down.
It is at this moment.
Yeah, at the moment, I really choose to isolate this.
Professor Liu, we hope to isolate this, but China-US, we have quite a number of issues to work on, whether geopolitics or other issues related to that. But the thing is, strategic distrust is the most important negative element.
That's the root
for
of the problem.
Everything going on between these two countries, and people have been working very hard to build things to the other direction, which is to build more trust. So how can both sides, in a way, this case included, this is not a single case, this case included, make sure what they do is going to be conducive to the really big picture. Of course, rule of law is important, but also at the same time, make sure the rule of law is updated. It's not going to be old-timed and old-fashioned, Professor Liu.
Well, by logic, you have to really check whether philosophically there is a foundation to go forward with the trade sanction, and also to alleviate the how to alleviate the trade sanction depending on the performance, and then better communication.